Hello, 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 and welcome to the Neighborhood Money Podcast. Drew, episode 50. We've been here now for 50 straight weeks, hopefully helping the listener build a life that they truly deserve. I know each and every week I look forward to hopping into the studio, chatting with you, chatting with our listener on a variety of different personal finance topics. But man, it's so exciting to have 50 actually be here. You know, when we first started, you'd started at one and thinking that 50 weeks straight is kind of a daunting task, but man, we've made it this far. And at least me personally, we've got a long ways to go from here. So I'm very excited.
We definitely have a long way to go from here, and 50 episodes, looking at it, actually, I don't know how to say this exactly, but 50 episodes doesn't sound like a lot, but when we do weekly episodes, 50 episodes means 50 weeks. So that means we're 2 weeks away from being a full year into this podcast, and what a journey it's been. I have to say, when we started out, I didn't really know how to look at the camera.
Yeah,
I didn't know how to talk
for
on
sure.
in a microphone.
Yep.
I still probably don't. But I know initially I just cringe hearing my voice talk, and now
Right.
it's a little bit better. And I never even really touched Instagram or TikTok
Yep.
or really YouTube as far as a creator standpoint. So it's been quite the journey and quite the learning experience.
It's been a whole lot of fun too, man. I remember I've looked at our, first couple of episodes recently, and just the quality of like our background, how we look, the camera angles, and then you're right, how we talked into the microphone, man. I remember when we went through those first couple of episodes, we were like bullet point robots, just basically reading off of our script. And now I think it's a lot more free flowing, and that's exactly what we're trying to get at, is just a very casual conversation about money and finance. And hopefully you, the listener, can get a lot out of it. But Drew, for episode 50, we thought it was going to be a lot of fun to bring in an article about the hot labor market and where that's at. But more importantly, provide 5 or even more, we'll see where it goes, tips on getting a new job and getting a higher salary. Because, if you're like me, I love getting paid more for the work that I do, especially when we're in times of high inflation. You got to kind of offset that. So I think this episode is going to bring a ton of value for the listener today.
It's a great article. I mean, really talking about, or you hear people talk about this great resignation, but if you're somebody that's really willing to go out and search for other jobs, there's a huge demand that I've noticed out in the job market. And if you play your cards right and use some of our 5 steps, I think it will help you be able to get into a different position, make a little bit more money, and maybe enjoy something more than you did before.
So the article comes straight from CNBC, and it's titled, "The Job Market is Still Red Hot Despite Recession Fears as the Great Resignation Continues." It's by Greg Kirchi. Do you have any idea how to say that, Drew? I probably just butchered that. Greg, if you're listening, odds are you're not. I'm very sorry. Um, but it starts out saying workers are still reaping the benefits of a hot labor market characterized by few layoffs, ample job openings, and a high level of voluntary departures. Drew, we've been seeing this now since basically the start of the pandemic, where people stayed home, they worked remotely, but the job market continued to be very hot. People were finding new opportunities, and then the great resignation started. You're starting to see, or we were starting to see, a ton of people leave their jobs because there was better opportunities out there, or they were just taking a step back, maybe, a little break, a little mental health break from working just because of the current environment.
When I look at all this remote work that's going on right now, I think when I hear of the great resignation, I almost in my mind am thinking there's just more opportunities than you ever thought were possible before. So these jobs that you thought you'd never be able to go to, or you really enjoy where you live and you don't want to relocate, but where you're at right now, the salaries aren't just where you want it to be. This remote work has really opened that up. So even though there is maybe a great resignation from potentially businesses shutting down, or people that were shut down for a temporary period of time decided to leave that industry and move into something else, and it's really just moving from people over here to over here, is And so I think that remote work has really amplified that and made the job market even more competitive because you're getting more people to apply wherever they really want.
So the article then also says that about 4.3 million people voluntarily left their jobs in May. That's, quite a bit. And it's just slightly down from the 4.4 million people that left their jobs in March. So we're seeing a pretty heavy or a high rate of people leaving. And Nick Bunker, who's an economist at Indeed, which is a job search site, is quoted in this article saying the quit rate was doing 100 miles per hour on the freeway before in March, and now it's slowing down to about 90 miles per hour. So while, the article is a little bit about, is the job market starting to slow down, but maybe it's slowing a little bit. But I mean, going 90 down the freeway is still ripping pretty fast.
Definitely ripping. And really going back just a little quote, like 4.3 million people voluntarily quitting or leaving their jobs. I would like, I wonder how much of that really comes from people that wanted to retire early. They just didn't want to go through that extra year or two of work. And they said, you know what, it might not be worth the hassle. I've listened to the Neighborhood Money podcast. I'm set up for retirement and I'm just going to retire early and just quit this job and not deal with the hassle.
That's a really interesting thought, especially with how the markets were, right? If you thought 2021, the markets were hot. I think 20 was like a 27% increase, 21 was like a 22% increase if you're looking at the S&P 500. So you had some pretty cushiony retirement accounts, I'm sure that probably helped some of those people think more seriously about retiring. And actually, Drew, it says that, so if we continue on with the article states that wages in May, so not only are 4.3 million people left their job, but wages in May jumped 6.1% year over year, which is the biggest annual increase in over 25 years.
Really kind of a loaded quote, if you ask me. It is a great wage increase, but it was due to so many other factors. One, I'm sure people are wanting to fill the jobs really bad. They want to get quality people, they wanted to retain their quality employees. But so much of it was the inflation rate and the cost of goods. And then the employee finally had some leverage to say, hey, I need to be able to keep up with my expenses. I'm going to need a larger increase than a 2 to 3% inflation rated or wage increase. So I think that's a huge factor that goes into this. It sounds extremely exciting and happy that the wages have gone up, but your purchasing power has gone down, and the food and most of your goods and services have gone up more than the 6.1% than you were given.
That's a really, really, really good point. If I can't remember exactly what the inflation print was in May, I think it was like 8.6, somewhere in that
Yeah,
ballpark.
that's what I believe it
So
was.
if you
Yep.
think about 8.6 year over year increase of just living and versus the 6.1% wage growth, you're still down over 2% year over year. And so even though you're totally right, the fact that wages are rising, all most of it, if not all of it, is probably driven by inflation. And that's why it's even more important when you are looking for a job and when you do get into those negotiations, you have to think about inflation when you're looking at a wage increase. We'll get more into that when we get into the actual tips, but I think that's a really interesting thing that you pointed out.
Yeah, and really, it even though it sounds good and maybe it's not as good as it is, these are one of those times where you can look at a time of potential recession, high inflationary times as a positive and use it to your advantage for your leverage when you are negotiating higher wage or a new job, and finally be able to keep the ball in your court, where a lot of times it might seem gloomy and doomy, but really at the end of the day, it's one of those, if somebody gives you a lemon, you want to make the lemonade. And that's kind of that mindset I've seen with so many people that we've interviewed on this podcast or you see in social media in the personal finance world is they take whatever opportunity they have and look at it as an opportunity to make their life better, and this is kind of one of those situations for the average employee.
So we've talked a lot about people leaving, wages increasing. But I think one of the most interesting statistics from this article is the fact that Gray gets into the layoff rate. And the layoff rate measures layoffs during a month as a percentage of the total employment. And in May, it was unchanged at 0.9%. And that probably doesn't mean a whole lot to you guys, the listeners. But before, so a little context, before the pandemic, the layoff rate, the lowest layoff rate in the country was 1.1%. So we're lower than that right now. But more interesting is that in May, that marked the 15th straight month that the layoff rate was lower than pre pandemic of that 1.1%. So not only are wages increasing, not only are people finding more jobs, but companies are keeping their employees, and which ultimately just means that you, the employee, has a lot more security.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those supply and demand are solutions or what I'm thinking calculations is what I want to say, where it really is they is huge demand for workers and employees, and there's not much supply if people are going to be leaving or potentially just moving to other positions. So the companies, this is a time where they don't necessarily have that leverage or that opportunity to say, hey, we're going to trim a little bit of fat in the company, we're going to get rid of you, and we're going to downsize. uh, so there's that side of it. But my mind also works where I'm kind of surprised that that layoff rate is so low, because during these hard times, I feel like there would have been more automation, this more remote work that would have made things potentially more efficient, and they would want to find a way to make the company run more efficiently, which would then lead to potential layoffs. So, it's kind of weird that I can definitely see both sides of it, and I just don't know where the future goes if the market starts doing better, if these layoff rates are going to increase, or if the market continues to slow down, that these companies are forced to make tough decisions to try to consolidate.
But generally speaking, the labor market is still in the worker, the employee's favor. We talked about the fact that wages are growing, people are finding jobs, layoff rates are low. So everything, all in all, is a really good time still to go out and find a job. However, the article does get into the fact of, is the labor market starting to slow down? And I know I made or read out that quote from going 100 miles per hour down the freeway, now down to 90. But there's another quote that says, from, I think his name is Zhao, and it states, we know quite explicitly the Federal Reserve is trying to cool down the economy, and one of those places that is going to happen is the labor market. So we are in still a hot economy, inflation is high, and so there might be some changes in the near future, specifically if we get into that recession where the labor market might change. But if you're listening to this in real time right now, we both still think it's really good time to see what else is out there. It might still be a really good time to increase your salary more than what your employer will actually give you as a raise, if you even get one at all.
Yeah, I would even say just don't even be afraid to try different job completely or completely different industry. I know when I talked to a few people in the beer business, they were even just saying during these times, there were so many people that were working in the service industry that when they were temporarily shut down, they were pretty much forced to find a different job. And when they were forced to actually get out of that industry, they really enjoyed it in their new jobs. And that's just kind of like one anecdotal evidence, but it's really, to me, it's like kind of a message of sometimes you're just stuck in a rut and you weren't really sure if you wanted to move companies. And right now, like Cav and I said, we think it's a time to really use this leverage to find something new and actually just try something new, or really try to get that wage increase that you've been trying to get for the last 20
And I
years.
think that's a perfect segue now, Drew, into our 5 tips that we have for you guys if you are considering, or even contemplating getting out there and looking for a new job. And so I'll start, Drew, with the first one, and that's to just get out there and apply, apply, and apply. Drew, you said that some people might be stuck in a rut and they might not know what else is out there. Well, now's better time, or there's no time like the present, and now is a really good time to get out there and apply. And so you have to do some work obviously to apply, but don't be afraid of rejection. It happens to everybody. Just get your resume out there, get your name out there, on applications, and try to get those interviews. And one thing, Drew, personally for me, granted, I worked remotely prior to the job I now have, but I gave full time remote work a shot, and it actually really paid off when I landed a new job. And so just try to expand your horizons or broaden your horizons and look at, what is out there besides what I'm doing now. And even if you want to stay in your own field of work, what else is available within your area or even outside of remote work is a possibility.
It's really never been an easier time to apply for jobs. I know before, when our family was in the beer business, it was you maybe put an ad in the newspaper, or maybe you have a sign outside of your business and you're just hoping somebody's seeing that. And right now, technology has pushed these applications to a new level where, say, you have ZipRecruiter or Indeed, or there's actually a website I know that's for 100% remote work and only has remote jobs on there, and that's Remote OK. Uh, that's the name of the website. And it's really, you have your template that already has your resume set in there. And then you can just type in whatever type of work you want to do, type in remote. And if remote's the way you want to go, and you can really find your job anywhere in the country, and you can be tossing out, you know, tens to hundreds of applications a day if you really want to. And if you get rejected, it says you get rejected. And if it gets, if you do get rejected, you just apply to more places, and you can really do a lot more with that than you used to be able to of going into the business itself and then writing your name on an application. So apply, apply, apply is definitely a great way to go in this type of a market.
Speaking of resumes, that brings us to tip number 2, and that's to actually revise your resume for the specific job that you are applying for, and to remove the fluff that your resume might contain. Drew, I remember, when I was coming out of college and I was applying for my first professional job, I had stuff on there from high school. I had stuff on there from college because I didn't really have much, right? Well, when I applied for my job that I just got in December, I completely removed all of that stuff. I hardly even put the fact that I went to Eau Claire for my undergraduate degree.
Really, that's so important to be able to revise your resume and really take out that fluff, like you were saying. Because if you're going into a job, I think you're an actuary, right? I mean, nobody cares if you were a, yeah, I know you weren't, but like nobody cares if you're a barista at Starbucks. They need to be able to know that what your job is going to be can actually, and what you have in the past can actually align in some sort of a way. So being able to do a little bit more research too on your company to be able to say, all right, I need to revise my resume to be able to fit job specific items, and then kind of look at what they're looking for and be like, what skills do I have that's going to fit in there, and be able to add that in. So when they look at your resume, they can say, this is the job we needed. This is a job description. This is a resume. It really seems like this guy has had some experience in here. He can bring something new to the table. And I think that's just really important too.
And so if we go to tip number 3, also, Drew, we just had some technical difficulties between the
Yeah.
transition between me and Drew. And Drew, I got to give you to you. You nailed that one. You nailed the transition. We'll see when we play it back what it actually sounds like, but I think you crushed that one.
Yeah, we'll see because I kind of did lose my train of thought. So that's probably, if I sounded like I was rambling, that might have been it.
Anyway, so tip number 3 is once you actually have applied and you've gotten asked to come in for an interview, maybe it's a virtual interview, tip number three is to actually prepare for that interview. Understand what the company is, understand what the specific role is. But then I think the most important one, and I found this one has paid dividends every time I've interviewed for a job, and it's just to be extremely curious and have curiosity outside of what you would typically think about. Obviously you're going to ask the questions about like what the culture is like, what am I going to do, etc., etc., but try to be more pinpoint in your curiosity and in your question asking. Ask what type of work that you're going to do and where is it going to align in the goals of the department, the division, the company, etc., and just really try to ask pinpointed questions, because it's going to show that you truly are curious about the job and that you also want to understand the broad picture of the work that you're actually going to be doing.
This is one of the times where curiosity will not kill the cat. In
Yes.
my, you know, really having those really thought out and researched questions can be so important during your interview, because when you're doing your job, even though it may be compartmentalized and you're only going to do what job specific thing you have to do, you want to make sure you know how that fits into the rest of the workflow of the company, because you need to be able to, what's that phrase that people always say, you need to be able to see the forest through the trees. And this is one of those times where you need to be able to look at what you're doing and say, if I do this, how's it going to affect the next person? If I do this, how's it going to affect the next person? So being able to see the final product and see where you fit into that, and having you ask those type of questions are so important, because it really, when you get into the the crux of what work you're going to be doing, it helps answer a lot of questions without going to the person above and constantly bothering them every single second of the day, because you kind of say, all right, I kind of know what I need, what the end goal is going to be. How can I problem solve and get to that solution, or at least exhaust myself for a time before I go and keep asking a bunch of other questions during the actual workday.
And I think that's hugely important, especially as a person that's trying to hire someone. I've had quite a bit of interviewing on the employer side myself. So I've always have looked for people that do have that curiosity, that try to better understand the broader picture, because one, it's like you said, it's not them just being told what to do, but two, it shows that there's a lot of room for growth. And if someone's curious, they're going to enjoy their work. And more often than not, if someone is enjoying their work, they're going to produce better results.
And really, when they are thinking through their job, those are the type of people that will make your business better as well, because they will see what works, what doesn't, and they can give opinions on that and say, all right, I know this is what we need to be doing. What we're doing right now doesn't necessarily make sense. I think this might be a good option. They don't necessarily have to change everything, or they might have a reason why you're doing that. But the fact that you're actually curious and wanting to make your position and the company better is just good overall for everybody.
Now, moving to tip number four, Drew, we have applied, we've gotten our interview, and now is probably the conversation that people dread. I know I'm not a huge fan of this, but it's all about salary negotiation. I'm not a huge negotiator. I'm going to be totally honest. I always feel super guilty being like, I want X more money, and then they come back and you play that game. But here's a huge tip, and I actually love this one. I implemented when I last applied, and you're going to be asked more often than not, unless it's the salary is stated out front, what your salary expectation is for the job. HR will ask you that, or whomever is hiring you will ask you that. And rather than giving them a number or giving them a range, this is what you should do. You should say, well, so here's your response. Well, what would a person in this position with my experience be worth? So rather than giving the number, flip it back to them and see where they come in at. Because let's be honest, employers are going to try to hire you for as cheap as possible. And so, say you think that you're worth $80,000 in the marketplace for whatever your role is. If you come in and say 80 grand, but the employer is actually willing to pay 90, they're probably going to meet you at 80 or maybe bump you up a little bit just to offset it, but you could be leaving a lot of money on the table. So that's why I'm a huge fan of just flipping it back over to the employer to see how they respond.
I'm with you there on being not like the greatest negotiator. And I have that same guilt in me where I just say a number. Well, I don't just say a number. So I think the part I would add on here that I like to do is really do the research for the position that you're going into. So even though you may be flipping the question back, like your response is, you still have an idea of actually what the market is. So if they give you some number that doesn't even align with what the marketplace goes, that's when you can come in and say, well, I think I did some research and this is where it actually needs to be. So going back to my guilt on it some of the times is when I do that research, it almost hurts me because then I say, I was actually going to go in there looking for X amount of dollars, but I know it's actually going for this, and I know like I look at what type of company it is and what location they're in, and then I'm like, uh, well, I know this is what it was asking, but that would be in a different state, so I think I would go down here. So I always have like guilt because I feel like I know just enough to hurt me, and sometimes even though I feel like I'm worth as much as they're willing to pay, if not more. It just there's part of me that being a previous employer that I just kind of see both sides of it, so I tend to hurt myself more than help myself whenever I've gone into those type of situations.
And you have to think beyond salary too. Think about the entire compensation package. It's really easy to get caught up with a 10, 15% raise when you move jobs. But when you account for things like healthcare or retirement, all of that type of stuff, you have to consider that when moving, because you might be able to get a 10% raise in salary, but you might be losing out on 5% of other type of benefits, so you might be netting only a positive 5 or whatever it is, and maybe that's okay. And you could play that out in a situation where you're actually worse off in a new job. So looking at that total package, I think is very critical when applying and moving and having these types of negotiations.
Super, super critical. There's a lot of people that I know will switch jobs because it'll be 50 cents or a dollar more an hour, but then their health insurance is either they don't get it or it's extremely bad, or they don't get potentially profit sharing or 401k matches or just other benefits in general. And all that has to be factored in. And whether you're working remote or say you're not working remote and you're just working a 9 to 5, like say you are somebody in the service industry or delivery industry, where is that location that you're driving to? Gas is one of the other things you have to factor into that. Or are you moving different states? There's so many different factors that go into it. You don't necessarily need to get overwhelmed on it, but if you're going to be switching a job for 2 to 3% more a year, does that really even mean 2 to 3% more a year? Because after health insurance and the match is either taken away or don't have it, where are you going to end up being in that situation? So being able to look at the full package, not just the salary, is very important.
I love that you've even brought up the fact of driving. What popped in my mind right away was childcare. Living down here in the metro, our childcare is by Hannah's work. But if she were to get a new job closer to where we actually live, it would be a pain to drive our kids to childcare and then back. So you would probably have to move and potentially pay more. And so that's just another example of things that you have to consider when moving jobs. And I really like that. But Drew, let's wrap it up here with number 5. And this is get your foot in the door. And I know this is really cliche. It's a really cliche tip. Everyone says you need to know somebody. It's all about connections, but it's so true to have connections to be able to make those relationships, to get yourself in the door, at least when you're applying. And you can do it in a variety of different ways now. It used to be that you would have to meet them via networking, but now we have LinkedIn. We also have recruiters depending on your field of work. So there's a lot of different options when it comes to getting your foot in the door and meeting people that are in the company or that are actually looking to hire people, whether it's HR or maybe in a smaller business, it's the actual hiring managers or the actual owner. But really, just getting those connections is going to help you so much. And even if you don't get the job, if you build a strong connection with people in the company, that's going to only open up more opportunities in the future.
This is the biggest one for me. I think out of the 5, this has to be the top. And, sometimes networking for some people is not the easiest, and I completely understand that because I feel that way as well. But really, you can network by just being the best you can be at your job, because by doing that, you can get noticed by the either clients you're working with, or if you go to conferences, and you can be a good employee and a personable person, because really at the end of the day, your next employer or the employer you're with just wants somebody that can get along with the culture and can really get the job done and be happy when they come to work. Most of the work that you'll be doing can be taught on site, and the people above you are willing to work with you and teach you and educate you what the job will be, but they need to be able to be around somebody for 40 plus hours a week and not pull all of their hair out of the head out of their head and turn their head completely gray. So this is probably the biggest tip out of all 5, is really building a relationship with other people. And if you're not great at building relationships with other people, or actually just cold calling, networking, uh, really just doing the best at your job and being personable can really help people say, I really like that guy. He does a great job. I'd love for him to be on our team. Maybe I'll reach out and see if you jump ship.
So, just to recap all 5 tips, it's apply, apply, apply. Number 2 is prepare for the interview and be extremely curious. 3, revise your resume to only include job specific items. 4, don't give a salary expectation. Rather, ask what the position with your experience is worth. And then number 5 is to get your foot in the door.
I like all 5 of those.
All right, Drew. So this week we're adding something fresh and new to the podcast. So let's jump to our new segment, Retweet of the Week.
Okay, so for the first week of the retweet of the week, I retweeted on my personal account. It was probably, let me see here, it was on June 29th. This was after one of the Jerome Powell, the head of the chairman of the Fed, and his quote was, "We understand better how little we understand inflation." And there was a meme that went along with it, and there's going to be a little profanity here. And it's Ruth from Ozarks saying, I don't know about. And
Yeah.
that was the translation for what Jerome Powell said. And I was just laughing my butt off, because when he's like, we understand better how little we understand inflation, it's like, you're just telling us that you just did not understand it at all. And you can kind of see that now.
Yeah, exactly. It's like from Game of Thrones. You know nothing, Jon Snow. They literally have no idea what has happened in the last, 12, 18 months.
No, or at least they're making it seem like that to like cover their butts or something. But when I saw that guy put that translation with that meme, I was just laughing my butt off, because it's just
So
hilarious.
my retweet of the week is actually very similar, and that does have to do with Jerome Powell as well. And I don't actually know who had this as a tweet because I sent it to you, Drew, as a picture. And I wish I would have saved the tweet. I'll do that next week, I promise. But it's a list of all the different quotes that Jerome Powell or the Federal Reserve has come out and stated over the last several quarters. And it also goes into the future. So starting in Q1 of 21, it says quantitative easing won't cause inflation. Next quarter, some inflation, but transitory. Remember, we heard that. And then the next quarter, they came out and said, okay, well, we're going to have high inflation, but we are peaking, meaning inflation is going to come down. The following quarter, okay, inflation maybe not transitory, but job market, wage growth, very strong. So now we're into 2022, Q1. The quote is need to hike aggressively to curb inflation, but no worries, economy very strong and soft landing possible. Q2 22 said negative growth in Q1, but no recession risk. So you can see that we continue to get worse and worse. Now, here's the fun part. Now we're getting into the future. So Q3 of 2022 is that, okay, recession coming, but you will not lose your home. Q4 of 22 is okay, you may lose your home, but you won't starve to death. And here's the kicker. So Q1 of 23, so next year, says, but future Jerome says, you may die, but you go to heaven. And I just was rolling when I read that because it's just like, it's so true up until this point. And then it just takes it to like the next level of just extreme, just extreme. And it's pretty funny how the progression, can line up. And hopefully it's not
I
true,
mean,
though. Hopefully it's not true.
hopefully it's not true. When you sent that to me, I was laughing too because I was like, man, I hope we don't get to Q1 of 2023 at this pace because really, like everything that was like leading up to that in the past, it's literally what Jerome Powell said in his minutes. And they've come true the next quarter. So it was just like what the complete opposite came true. So even though it's a parody or like satirical, it's still just hilarious. And the one for the prediction for the next quarter actually could sound to be pretty true.
Totally agree. All right, Drew. Well, that was our first retweet of the week. I liked it. I thought it was a lot of fun. Drew and I are both on Twitter a lot. I don't actually retweet stuff. Maybe I should. But, anyways, hopefully this is a segment you guys enjoy. Let us know in the comments if you're over on YouTube or shoot us a DM over on Instagram if you like the segment. Let's go, Drew. Let's move into what's going on in the neighborhood. Drew, the 4th now has come and gone, and I always feel like people say once the 4th of July is over, summer is over. And I think of like what a crazy statement that is because you still have all of July, you have all of August, and almost all of September. But it's so true because like when we were in high school or in school, we were only like a month out from football camp. And once football camp hits, we are back in the swing of things. And so, this year obviously is moving fast. It's cliche to say, but it is. And summer feels like it is nearing the end, even though it's not. But with that, Drew, what the heck's going on over in your neighborhood now, with the 4th of July behind us?
I kind of lost my train of thought of what I was going to say for this week. And the reason for that is for you listeners, before we started this episode, Cavan and I were just starting to talk about random algorithms that our personal social medias, either TikTok or Instagram, have, and it was just getting pretty fun and kind of hilarious, just kind of seeing where we're at in our life with it. So I thought we could kind of even pick up on that because that's where my mind has been.
Well, let me jump in there, Drew, because it all started with the fact that I had no idea what I was going to talk about for this week and what's going on in the neighborhood. But I did say that I went out and bought a porterhouse steak to grill up tomorrow. And then I had admitted that I know way more about meat cuts and steaks because I've been watching a ton of videos on just meat, like steaks, different cuts, where it's from. And I was actually saying that the porterhouse, and listeners, I don't know if you know this, but half of the porterhouse is a New York strip, and the other half of a porterhouse is a filet mignon. So it's honestly one of the best bang for your buck. And I think I paid like $28 for solid porterhouse that you get two really nice cuts of meat.
Really, that commercial now for TikTok saying hashtag TikTok taught me. It's oh my god, it's like the truest hashtag ever. I'll go on TikTok and I have like way too much stuff on my TikTok about plumbing right now because I've been trying to look at some plumbing stuff and I get like extremely
You're
Uh,
just amped
how do
up
I?
to go learn about plumbing stuff, you know?
I don't know
You're a
why it is,
dad,
but
you're almost 30. It's just that time of life. It's a rite of
it has to be.
passage.
And I just like love watching people like cut pipes or put new pipes on or to glue them together and like some and then I look it's like filled up with that. It's like some other random DIY stuff, lawn care. And like it kind of switches sometimes because I know you're on like a big like meat cuts type of algorithm and I'll just get into random uh little rabbit holes like that to TikTok, but there's one other thing on my algorithm that's just like really strange. Like I have way more megalodon type of content than I think most people should.
I'm gonna be honest,
And
I have no idea what a
and like
freaking
I can't
megalodon
believe
is.
I literally cannot believe you don't know what megalodon is. For one, there's a movie about it, and it
Megalodon?
it was a historic. It was like it's now well supposedly an extinct shark, the biggest shark ever, is like bigger than blue whales. So it's like a great white shark that's bigger than a blue whale, and they have stuff like on Shark Week that they kind of talk about it, and like you can find like megalodon tooths, and they're like freaking huge.
I just Googled it and it said giant extinct sharks measured up to 65 feet. Holy cow.
Yeah, and then there's a movie called The Meg that has that on there, and they're doing all there's so like all this stuff, and I was like, everybody says that it's extinct, but we know that there is proof that they were alive at one time, but there's no proof saying that they're completely extinct. There's so much ocean out there, and I think that I kind of like that, and
You're just a
it's so deep.
conspiracy guy too. Like you just feed
I do,
into that.
I feed into that stuff so hard. Like there's like in the megalodon one, it's like randomly just I don't know why I'm so entertained by it, and I know it's completely like improbable that they're still around or whatever, but I'm
Yeah.
just like, oh yeah, I'm like, yeah, there's like these random attacks or like these things go missing. Like, it could be the megalodon. But I cannot believe you never heard of a megalodon because
No. I mean, maybe at one point, but it's
have
something that
have
just
you
like
ever
purged from my memory.
have you ever heard of a gigantopithecus?
No. Now you're just getting out there. You're
No,
just making
it,
stuff up at this point.
no, it's an extinct ape that was like 8 or 9 feet tall.
Okay.
So
But what
that's
is
where
it
people
called? What is it
think
called?
Gigantopithecus. So that's
Giganto.
where people think the mythology of Sasquatch comes from because they were upright walking, large apes, and they came across from like the North America when it was like connected to whatever else it was.
Oh, okay. It looks like the combination between an orangutan and almost like a silverback.
Yeah, but they're like 8 feet
Yeah,
tall.
massive.
So like that makes me think Sasquatch is probably real. It's just a Gigantopithecus, but they're probably extinct.
What are you talking about? I see those black Sasquatches against the highway all the time. Those things are totally real.
Yeah. So, anyways, my random mind that just feeds into all that stuff. Though those things could be I mean, Sasquatch could be probable. Like I don't think he's there, but I think it was probably the Gigantopithecus that people talked about.
But that would mean that a Gigantopithecus is still alive and around.
No, because they're thinking they're extinct. But I guess people say they think they see
That's what I
them,
mean. They
but
still say that there's
I don't
sightings.
I don't know if I necessarily believe all the sightings. Like watching them on Discovery Channel, they just like scream at the top of their lungs and then they're like, "Yep, that's a Sasquatch call." Like I think that's just like pretty ridiculous, but I think the mythology where it came from
I could see it though.
has
Well,
some backing behind
I
it.
was I was to say, I wonder how long the Gigantopithecus was around. I mean, it says it was extinct in the early to middle Pleistocene. Does that sound
Yeah.
like the right thing? Do you know when that ended?
N- no.
No
I mean,
idea.
for how much random fun facts I have in my brain, I should have that, but I don't.
Yeah. Well, if I can't find it in the next 3 seconds here, I'll just say it was a long time ago. The reason
Yeah.
I asked, I was wondering if like humans align or like overlap them.
Oh,
Oh, it doesn't look like it because it looks like they,
how'd they know that?
I don't know, carbon dating maybe, but it looks
I don't
like
know.
humans came later on in the evolutionary cycle, but we are not, I
It
don't,
has to be a theory because, like, I mean,
maybe.
I guess there's some carbon dating, but how would you know every single one? Like, there might be a dead one that was like thousands of years later that we just haven't found yet. Bones for.
Yeah,
Think
that's
about that.
fair. That's fair.
I can definitely see that we're getting older, that our algorithms are about DIY cooking. And I know yours isn't about random conspiracy stuff, but I have them just kind of randomly sorting through just because they're just
I
entertaining.
mean, mine's like the stereotypical 30-year-old dad: steaks, smoking meat, and mowing the lawn. That's it. That's all my algorithm is, and it's beautiful.
Mine will have to get there with meat soon because I love meat. I cook it a decent amount, but I couldn't tell you what a New York strip or a porterhouse where any of that stuff comes from. Well, anyways, enough rambling for this episode. I actually really enjoyed telling you about Megalodon and the Gigantopithecus. So, for anybody listening, we will get back to what the actual episode was, and that was really an article that we went through talking about the red hot job market and just the opportunities out there. And we've really finished it up with 5 tips on ways to better your chances of getting that next job or getting that next pay increase. And that involved, make sure you're applying to as many places as you can. Make sure that you are revising your resume. Make sure that you're preparing for that interview. Don't give that salary expectation. Flip that question back around onto your employer. And then, lastly, most importantly to me, is really getting that foot in the door, being able to network and get along with the people that you are going to be working with in the future. And that was the 5 tips that we think can really help you get a leg up on your competition for that next pay raise or job that you want to get into, or just maybe you want to change a different industry and just really switch things up. And that really wraps up this week's episode of the Neighborhood Money. Anybody listening, we want to say thank you very much. If you still believe that the Megalodon or the Sasquatch still alive, let me know. uh, but really, thanks again for listening, and we will see you guys next week in the neighborhood.